We're talking about growth and growth strategy. In our last session, I introduced you to the growth matrix, where we looked at four different options for growth: uh, uh, product innovation, market growth, uh, expanding our existing product or service into our existing market, and then diversification. Number of different options for growth. Now, I'd like to talk a little bit more and go a little deeper into this idea of strategy and growth strategy. The word strategy comes from the Greek word strategia. Strategia, interpreted the art of generalship. Strategy for many centuries was a military term. We thought of a military strategy. If we're taking over this army or taking over this country, what's going to be our strategy? It was a military term. It wasn't until the 1950s, the 1960s in this country that we started using strategy as it relates to business, a business strategy. And we began seeing colleges and universities teach business strategy then in the 1960s and 1970s. My favorite definition for the word strategy comes from a professor at the University of Toronto, Roger Martin. He defines strategy as an integrated set of choices that positions you on a playing field of your choice in a way that you win. Let me repeat that. Strategy, an integrated set of choices that positions you or your company on a playing field of your choice in a way that you win, or your company or your team wins. I love that definition of strategy. I think a key question as we're developing strategy is the following: what has to be true for this strategy to be successful? What has to be true? We're saying, okay, what assumptions can we make related to this strategy? What has to be true for this strategy to be successful? Do we have to have a strong economy? Do we have to see growth in our industry? Do we have to have the right people in the right seats in terms of our own business? Do we have to have adequate amount of capital? What has to be true for this strategy to be successful? Sometimes I think we confuse strategy with tactics. Oftentimes, when we think of the two, we think of strategy more long-term versus tactic more short-term. I think another way to compare the two is that strategy tends to be more general, more generic, where tactics tend to be more specific. If we can touch it, if we can see it, it's more likely that it's a tactic versus a strategy. I think there are three important questions that we need to answer when developing a strategy. And this comes from an author by the name of Don Schmieke, written a number of very good books on leadership and strategy. Schmieke suggests the following: we need to ask ourselves these three questions. The first question is, which battle? The second question, who is our enemy? And the third question is, how do we win? Which battle? So if we're fighting a war of sorts in our business, many different battle fronts, so to speak, different markets, different products. So we have to decide with our strategy, okay, which one of those, which battlefield, so to speak, do we want to exert our capital and our effort, our people? Which battlefield? Again, the battlefield could be a particular market, a state, a country, a city, a particular industry. So which battlefield, number one. Number two, then once we've identified the battlefield, the particular slice, competitive slice that we want to go after, then we say, okay, who's the enemy? And it's usually either a who or a what. Who or what's going to prevent us from being successful on this particular battlefield, this space? Where will we be most vulnerable in this battle, so to speak? And I'm reminded of a famous quote from Thomas Carlyle, the author and philosopher. He said the following. He said, if there is no enemy, there is no fight. If no fight, there's no victory. No victory, there is no crown. So this highlights to me the importance of identifying the enemy. What are we up against? What obstacle? What company? What competitor that's going to prevent us from being successful? Who's our enemy? And then that third question then is, and how do we win? How do we defeat this enemy? How do we succeed? How do we win? So the example that I'll share with you, I had a client, this was a number of years ago. He was a general contractor here in Atlanta, Dave. The economy had slowed down quite a bit. This was the last recession, 2008, 2010. The economy had slowed down quite a bit, and David noticed this. He and I were having a meeting, and he said, "Yeah, we're not getting as many new building opportunities, construction opportunities. That we're certainly seeing a slowdown." I said, "So, given that, Dave, what's going to be your strategy? How are we going to survive this recession that we have found ourselves in?" And so I asked him the three questions. I said, "Okay, so number one, let's come up with a strategy. If you're going to pick a battlefield, a space that you want to own during this recession, what might that be?" And what he said to me, he said, "Well, we do construction of buildings, office buildings, shopping centers, and churches, and primarily in Atlanta and in Gwinnett County. That's where we do most of our work." He said, if I were gonna pick out a space that we want to try to dominate over the next couple of years, it would be office buildings in Gwinnett County. We want to build office buildings in Gwinnett County. That's what we do best. That's what we're most famous for. That's where we can be most successful. That's going to be our battlefield the next couple of years. I then asked him the second question. I said, "Dave, given that battlefield, who is your enemy? What's your primary obstacle to success on that battlefield?" And it was interesting. Dave's immediate response was, "Well, it's my competitors, the other general contractors." And he said, there are many of them now. It used to be primarily local contractors. Now we're getting competition from outside of the metro Atlanta area. He said, it's our competitors. And then he thought for just a moment, and almost he paused, and he said, "Wait a minute." He said, "The competitors are certainly an issue, but I think there's a more formidable enemy today." He said, "It's my customers. The builders are my enemy today." And I said, "Well, explain. I don't understand." He said, "Well, historically, the builder, the owner, the developer, when he had a project, say it was an office building, he would bring us in and maybe another contractor and be involved in the design of that building. And if we were involved in the design of the building, oftentimes then we would be included in the opportunity to bid on the construction of that building, and we won many of those projects." He said, "Today, everything's changed. Today, we're not typically involved in the design of the building. And as a result, when the bids go out and they're going out to a dozen or so contractors, it's usually going to the low bidder. We're not winning very many of those opportunities." So he said the enemy today is the developer, which led then to my third question. I said, "Dave, given that you want to go after office buildings in Gwinnett County and your biggest obstacle is your client is the developer, how do you win that battle, that struggle?" And he said, "Tim, it's simple." He said, "Now that I think about it," he said, "going forward, we're only going to bid on office buildings in Gwinnett County, and we're only going to bid on those projects if we are involved in the design of the project. If we're not invited to the design portion, we're not going to bid on the project because we won't win." To me, that's a winning strategy. And that's a great example of coming up with a strategy. It's number one, what's the battlefield? Number two, who or what's the enemy? And third, how do we win? What's your strategy now going into the next quarter or the next year?